Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together. Darling Hazel Evans, you are who I think most people know from just an exemplary career in retail and in building incredible businesses, and also for the work that you've been doing, evangelizing really fractional executive work and being behind the scenes and pulling together operational powerhouses. I'm so excited to get to pull back the onion layers today and get to know Hazel, the incredible human and woman and mother and daughter and sister that you are, and to learn more about you and your money stories. So welcome to Getting Rich Together, Hazel. Happy to have you.
Thank you, Shema. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So Hazel, let's take us back to a young Hazel, maybe one that was between 5 and 12 years old. What was life like for you? What were some of the money stories that you saw?
Yeah, so I am Scottish. I grew up in Scotland, in the heart of Scotland, in the middle part of the country. My dad was an accountant and he was sort of mid-career at that age when I was a kid. He'd been in the job since he started as a boy. I believe he started even as maybe an intern as an office boy back in the day. And by the time I knew anything about money, he was doing the books for the company. He was running payroll for the company. And I was starting to learn smart things in school like fractions. Back in the day, that's what my dad calculated payroll based on. So as I grew up through school and going into high school, I was really good at math. That was the thing that I was good at. And as I went into high school, one of the classes that was available was accounting. And well, I had the best tutor at home. So that was my A+. I was always really into math.
That's so wonderful. Having that experience, being comfortable with math is great. Were you at that time, as far as what life was like for you, did you have any sort of inclinations at any point around, oh, things cost money, or we need to think about this? Was there any sort of early notions around the world outside of you and sort of what life was like?
Yeah. So the conversations that we had around the dinner table were pretty open, although it was privately open. It was something that could not be discussed outside the house. Money was not a topic to talk about outside of our four walls, but we could talk about it as a family. Dad would talk about wages. Mum would talk about he potentially didn't have the promotion that he wanted and she would have to work as well. So my mom actually went to work and she did 2 or 3 jobs.
Wow.
To manage his support system, if you like, to help him spend the extra time. Back in the day, there was no such thing as overtime pay. You just had to work more and more you just had to be that sort of extra hard worker to get that accreditation, to get that promotion. And my dad worked far away from home. He worked about a good hour commute each way, so he was gone. So my mum took a couple of jobs, and what she said was, she had growing kids in the house. Things cost money, clothes. People were just growing up fast. To go on vacations, we had to save for that because the money wasn't just sitting there. It was a career growth opportunity for my dad that my mom wanted to have behind the scenes. Our friends also were doing something similar. My parents' friends in the community, they were in similar situations. Everybody was in the sort of career growth mode, but many of them, their wives didn't work. They stayed at home and they took care of the kids. My mom kind of felt this drive to do better. She had come from a family of 4 and it had been really tough for her parents going through the war and stuff like that. My grandfather was in the military and then he was a miner. He was actually the head miner of one of the mines in Scotland. And while that did bring in good money and good housing, 4 children growing up was really tough. So my mom had this desire to do better for me. And I picked that up really early on because she was not working just to go on holiday. She was working to make sure I had a better life than she had.
Yeah.
And that drive was what I picked up on very early, coupled with the savings. So when you go shopping and there's something on sale that you use all the time, like dish soap or practical things, you buy 2 of it when it's on sale because then you don't have to pay the full price later. So she was a bit of a bargain hunter and she was really good at it.
Does this translate into anything that you do today?
I actually find that I still see something on sale and still buy it because I think, that is a saving. So I learned very early on, I think it was about 12 when I learned that anything beyond 20% is a really big deal and you should take the opportunity.
Oh my God, I love that, Hazel. So going through high school, did you ever find yourself doing anything to make money? Were you really focused on studies? What was high school and then moving into university experience like?
All of my education was money plus education. So I did start working in high school. Back in the day, it was £1 per hour. So I'm aging myself just a little. It was hard work, but you did get tips and you did get bonuses if you worked. And what I was trying to do with that was to buy things like a CD. So important things or a vinyl album or go to a concert. That was where I made my money. That continued through all of my education years where I always felt the need to work to have a quality of life and a lifestyle that I wanted, and also to be able to afford to buy the things that I wanted to wear or go to the places I wanted to go or to travel. And in my early sort of 20s, I think I was 22 when I bought my first home. And I was the first of my friends to do that. So what I had learned going through school, apart from bargain hunting at the grocery store and shopping, was that the cost of rent in Scotland was more expensive or the equivalent of the cost of a mortgage. And I had learned that getting onto the property market would make me some money because it just naturally grows in value. And particularly in areas where I lived, there was a lot of new builds happening. So I thought, let me check that out. What I then did was I sat down with a mortgage broker and said, what do I need to do to afford a house, because I don't know what to do. And my parents at the time did not own their property, they were renting. So I didn't have a sort of backbone to go and lean in and ask my dad about the fractions on this one. It was a lady that I worked with and commuted on the train to work with that was in the mortgage department of a company I worked at. So I asked her.
Wow. And also, Hazel, let's just interrupt for a second to say what insight you had at such a young age to be curious about investing your money in a way that would significantly benefit you. How was your mind operating that you knew that this was the right thing? This is not a common narrative that we hear.
Oh gosh, I don't actually know that it was anything brilliant. I had seen and witnessed the sort of joining of the dots of the money with my parents, and we had open conversations within our 4 walls about how to make things work, that I was more aware of the cost of things in the world when I came out of college and was going into the workforce. And when I got my own wages, I was trying to think through, well, where am I going to live? Because I need to move out of my parents' home and move into the city. And then started looking at the rents and started going, gosh, this just doesn't feel right. I heard lots of things on the news about, first-time buyers and stuff like that. And I thought, could that be me? And that was really the curiosity. Could it be me? I didn't know if it could be, because I also kind of thought, given the culture I lived in, that a first-time buyer was a husband and wife versus a single woman or 2 women or a group of friends. None of that came into my head. I just didn't know if it was even possible. Thought I would ask this lady who worked in the mortgage department. She was an underwriter for the company I was working at the time. And I asked her, what does this mean? What is a first time buyer? And what do you have to do to be a first time? I'd be my first time buying. And it was a super innocent question. And that was really where I got my foothold on money. So she was able to tell me what I needed to do and have a deposit and how much that deposit would be. And she was also able to walk me through how mortgage rates were calculated in Scotland, which at the time was 5 times of your salary. So you could multiply your salary 5 times, and that was the maximum house you could buy. And then you had to have 10 to 20% off savings.
How long did it take from that conversation when you bought the place? What was the time frame?
It took me about 4 months because I had been saving all the time. One of the things my dad had said to me, which was a bit of a feminist thing for a dad to say, was as you grow up, always have a savings account. And your savings account should always be about a year's worth of your salary, just in case you get laid off from a job or your company doesn't survive. He said, never ever be in a situation where you are dependent on a man or another person to manage your finances, run your finances, or pay your bills.
Go Dad.
Yeah, so Dad was like, he drummed that into me and said, no, you must stand alone. That stuck with me. Throughout my life, I've had 3 marriages and separate bank accounts in every one.
Good work, Hazel. So take me through starting off your working career, really your corporate ascent. You've held a number of prestigious positions and had a really illustrious career. And certainly at those different companies, I imagine there were so many components and things to consider. Certainly at some point looking at a 401k or thinking about investing in the public markets or increasing home ownership or other sorts of things. Did this first experience in buying your home open up additional financial curiosities over time? How did that unfold for you as you increased your wealth and position over time?
Yeah, interestingly, it did. When I became a homeowner, I began to think more about interest rates because I was looking into that when I was getting the mortgage and when I was shopping with mortgage brokers to, which mortgage broker do I want to go with based on the interest rates. When I learned about interest rates, I realized there was interest on other things, like it was pensions, they called it, rather than 401k, private pensions in the UK, and also stocks. And I was super curious about this. When that particular job was ending, I decided to go into the temping world in a project management capacity and sought financial companies as a role. And I actually ended up at stockbroker for a while.
Oh my gosh, Hazel, I had no idea.
Yeah, I was working in the stockbroker, and because I was tech savvy, I actually ended up launching their first public offering technology solution. So through that, just launching the technology solution and looking into building out the portfolios of the people who were buying these stocks, and then some of them were, short trading as soon as the stocks went public and so on and so forth. I began to learn a lot about stock trading just by watching it, not by doing it. And that's when I said, okay, well, I'm going to get into the pension space to start to build my retirement. I think at that point I was in my 20s, around 24, 25. I also at that time opened my very first brokerage account because I had been working for a stockbroker. I now understood what a brokerage account was. And I just had a few small stocks. It wasn't a lot. It was more what I considered money I could lose, because what I did understand from working in the stockbroker is it was high reward but also high risk. You had to only sort of test the money or gamble the money that you could stand to lose and not be upset about and learn from. I tasted the water there in my early 20s.
Wow, that's so incredible. Let me just pause and say, Hazel, I think you're the first woman I've spoken to who's made such early on just savvy decisions across so many fronts. It is very, very inspiring. And part of me is like, man, I wish my dad told me those things when I was younger, because what an incredible foundation to be able to build wealth and to build knowledge. And I think so much of it is understanding knowledge and curiosity around it.
Yeah.
So walk me through, some of the pivotal moments throughout your career. Obviously, you've held a number of different roles at some pretty prominent businesses. And certainly with each role, there are so many different ways that we can think about money, compensation packages, how we think about earning money. I think so many times we think about just investing as the key mechanism, but also negotiations and making sure that, you're being compensated. How were those conversations for you throughout your career?
When I look back now, I think in the 20s, they pretty much sucked. I wasn't real great at negotiating for me. And I was also in my 20s having a grand old party time, enjoying life and going through a great marriage in the city and then a turbulent divorce. So it wasn't all glorious to start with. It was pretty bumpy. A lot of wealth that I had gained was lost through the divorce. And then I came to the US. When I came to the US, I was getting into the 30s. I kind of had the attitude of, I actually do own my own worth and I should speak up. And I started to speak up and say, this is what I need to be able to make this job work. I've been really lucky in that the conversations I've had with my employers over the years was favorable. And the negotiations were favorable. Anytime I was in a position of authority where I knew that the company could change over or potentially reorg at any time, I actually went into the conversations with the contract requesting an exit package. That was to ensure that now that, I'm in the States, now that I'm going through my career, I now have children, and I now have the same attitude as my mom, which is I need to make their lives better than mine. And I need to make sure that not only is my family financially secure, but that my children are financially secure and that they can go on with their lives and I have enough money for college bills and whatever it may be for them as they were growing up through their years. I really focused on working with companies that had bonus structures in addition to compensation, sometimes stock in addition to compensation, and really companies that I could stand behind from a brand perspective that I believed in. So companies that support diversity, companies that support women and enable women, companies that love to see women in tech and support and enable and elevate that. Those were the types of companies I had the privilege to work with. Fast forward to where I am at now with my company. Upon exiting one of those prestigious companies, I had an exit package, which was able to translate into forming my company, which is now a fractional executive firm.
It's really incredible. I think understanding what exit packages are and, the entire life cycle of career development, these are conversations that I feel like are happening now, but didn't really happen before. So much of this stuff, I imagine, was also owning your worth and being vocal and testing and trying and seeing sort of what is going to happen. It sounds like you've been pleasantly surprised by asking and then also receiving when you ask.
I think it's something that we should all think about as women. Typically, VP and above positions today, if you were going through a recruiter, the recruiter will often ask for an exit package for those more senior positions. Companies reorg all the time. Many companies who are looking for senior leadership are in fact looking for senior leadership for a period of time. So thinking through what got them from A to B does not necessarily mean the same team that's going to get them from B to C. So as executives and as women, we should always be planning our next act. So it doesn't matter who we work with. or who we work for, we should always be planning what's right for us and what our career next act may be. And if that means saving to start your business, if that means negotiating an exit package to give you a break in between jobs because you just need mental therapy to decompress and perhaps get over corporate burnout and then start a new job. It's up to us to own that and ask for that. And I think you would be surprised at how many companies do that as standard. But if you don't ask, you won't get. And as in Scotland, Granny used to say, the wean that doesn't put her hand out for a sweetie won't get one.
She is wise. That is a very, very true statement. Now, Hazel, you've been running your own firm now, and certainly when we think about investments, things that we invest in our life, really believe that money is such an incredible vehicle to exercise our values and what's most important to us. So how did you come to this decision to have a corporate exit, if you will, and say, I'm done with working, creating this body of work in this capacity, and I'm now going to double down on my own ability to create and to see through a vision? Certainly, there are a lot of things to consider in that process. What were some of the dominoes that had to fall for you, and how did you decide to make that investment?
Yeah, so the dominoes had to be for me, what is the gap in the market that I could solve? Where is that? Is it now? Is it present? And is it growing? So I was really watching the executive space and the transition in that space. I was seeing many people in mature life stages go out for illness, have children, leave the job because of stress or corporate burnout. And also I was seeing reorgs happen where roles would be eliminated and there would be a vacuum for a moment where the internal teams were having to pick up the work because the availability of the executives didn't really exist. The traditional sources to look for them wasn't there. And then when we did find backfill executives for that period of time, the skill set wasn't complete. There was a bit of a mess. They weren't focused in the space. They had done a little bit here and there, which still meant there was more work on the existing team. The budget wasn't always there because when you were looking for a backfill for a temporary role in the corporate world, you're not offering the temporary worker salary plus bonus plus stock that you offer the full-time person. It tends to just be that salary component, and that reduces what you can buy for that. And I saw that that was happening both with small companies and enterprise companies over the last sort of 5 years before my exit. And that's what really made me say, aha, there is the gap. And if a fractional executive who was trained in these disciplines or multiple disciplines could fill that gap for a fraction of the cost, that would solve the problem, because then those people are focusing on those high important tasks versus the check the timesheet tasks and so on that every corporate executive has. They can empower the team of the lower level executives to learn about some of these roles. So there was a kind of win-win. Save the money, availability, skill set's good. Plus, you can lead the team without physically managing the team because, you are an entity, but you can lead them and help empower them for growth. So there was an opportunity to pay it forward and give it back. And that was really what was the trigger for me to sit down and say, this is what I want to do. And I had a background in marketing, in sales, in operations, in product management. So I had a broad skill set that I could offer personally, coach others, and I had a massive network of executives that I had known throughout the years, many of which had left the corporate world and had their own consultancies because they no longer wanted to do the big corporate role. They were very happy working with multiple clients. And the upside of that was they were all super fresh. They knew all the latest tech. They were in touch with all the new innovation, and they seemed to be a good fit.
And so looking at sort of the actual investment component into your business, right? So obviously it takes time for things to build. You're likely at this stage considering your children and your expenses and sort of all of the things that make up your pie. And pulling money out to start something is certainly risky. And so when you're thinking about your, just from the financial standpoint, your decisions and how you decided to do this, what were some of the top 1 to 3 things that you considered financially before taking this leap?
First thing I looked at was, what did I have in the bank and what would I gain in the duration of the exit package. And my goal was to have 3 years of runway, because starting any business can be risky. The first year is often the slowest year for business because you're just becoming aware of everything and you have to market, and it takes a while to get some momentum. So I made sure I had 3 years of runway. And 3 years of runway meant all my expenses, including my kids' expenses, including family expenses, holidays, everything. 3 years of runway. And I had been planning this for a couple of years prior to exiting the role. I did have some good starting grounds. I also looked at my brokerage accounts when there was opportunities and when there was extra cash. I put more money into those brokerage accounts. Got into crypto and some of the good stuff that we're now seeing benefits on. So I invested, I would say not relatively early, but probably mid to later, but still made good money on that. I had a process of, for every paycheck, a certain amount of money went into the investments. And I had a fairly high risk portfolio, because high risk means high reward, but I could lose it because I had the savings elsewhere. So this was what I called the sort of play money, if you like, where you can gamble over here a little bit on the stock market. I also, for the last 15 years, every single year, maxed out my 401k. That was mandatory, because then the compounded interest on that will just go up and up and up and up. And by the time I retire, I'll be very well set. So that is something that, if folks haven't thought about, is a really quick and easy win. And often you'll get a match from the company, so you'll get that extra. If you can, prioritize that at a minimum. I then began to look into other alternative investments, but decided to wait until the company was up and running to do those. Now have put in some other investments as angels to a couple of companies that I believe in, women founded, because it's something I believe in. But again, it's something I could lose, because it is an investment in a company. These companies are startups, but that was also a calculated risk of a nominal fee. It's not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's enough to help the company grow, and potentially that will have some return on investment, 5 to 10 years down the line.
So looking at sort of Hazel, the mother, money conversations, as you saw, obviously growing up, played an incredible role and impact in just the financial prowess and leadership and what you've been able to build. What are the money stories that you're sharing with your children, and how are you sort of looking at their financial education in the future?
Yeah, so when my daughter was in college, she was struggling to find work after college. She had her college job just like I did. So I instilled the fact that I'll pay for some of your college, the rest you have to work and pay the difference. She did that. I didn't also pay her all her college bills. She paid them herself when she came out of college. So there was an agreement of what mum would contribute, and dad, of course. But then she owned some of it, because I wanted her to know what it felt like to pay for. She would help me work through her FAFSA application, same with my son. And then when her bills come in, I would talk to her about how to manage her bills and how to build her savings and so on and so forth. And then when she couldn't find a job, I encouraged her to start her own business. She now has a successful media business, never worked for a corporate company, and has 5 of a team, I think now, maybe more, and is doing great. My son is still in college, and he recently moved out, so he's learning how to pay bills and what it costs. So we have some good money conversations about how to balance the books and how and when to pay things bi-weekly versus weekly versus monthly. He's seen the benefit of savings. He has a 401k, and he also has stock from one of his companies that I've advised him not to sell because it will go up. So I have open conversations with my kids about money. It's important because they don't get taught in school how to manage their money. Unless they see and hear how it's done, they don't know. So we talk about it. Sometimes it goes wrong because, they're in their 20s, but that's where we do have a little bit of a safety net to catch them if they fall, but it's not because they're out drinking and partying that we're catching them. It's because they put something in for a date and it comes out on a Friday rather than the Monday because they don't know that the banks take it out early. So it's a couple of little blips like that we see. It's not big stuff. But I'm really proud that my daughter is now a businesswoman, earning more money than she could have earned in the corporate world. And my son is now doing a business major in college with the view that he too will have his own business.
Wow, Hazel, that is so amazing. You must just be so incredibly proud and so excited. There are just two last things I'd love to ask you around legacy. You already spoke a little bit to what you're building today and sort of, I believe, the legacy of changing, this economic infrastructure on labor and work and how we look at business. But as you sit back, let's say looking at your life in the next 50 years and you look back and see the body of work that you've created, what does legacy look like for you?
Legacy for me is to expand this company and have it recognized as a completely amazing fractional team of executives who are diverse and inclusive and who have a large proportion of women in leadership and people of color in leadership. Diversity and inclusion is my life. I come from a mixed race family. I come from mixed gender family. I am so proud of that. And I've done so much in my career around diversity and inclusion at corporations I've worked with, where they have now become best places to work. If I could look back 50 years from now, I want my children and perhaps my grandchildren look back and say, Grandma or Mom did something good and she changed lives for the better. And she did it with her big heart and she did it with her Scottish savvy. And she's my mom and I'm proud of her. And if that happens, I will be happy.
Hazel, I have a strong feeling that you're already that leader and creating that impact that your children are so proud of. My last question is, us, the audience, with all that you're up to, Hazel, what can we do to support you? What do you need right now? What are you calling in?
I am calling in business leaders and CEOs who would like to experience the benefit of the fractional executives that I have. Come chat with me and I will help grow your business.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much, Hazel. You are an incredible leader, woman, admire deeply. Thank you for being here today on Getting Rich Together. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Shama. I appreciate you too. You're amazing. You're amazing.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe, and if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.